On April 30th, 1945, deep beneath the shattered ruins of Berlin, the world of Adolf Hitler came to its final, tragic end. Outside, the city that had once been the proud capital of the Third Reich was nothing more than a smoldering graveyard of rubble, its streets reduced to twisted steel and broken stone. The constant thunder of Soviet artillery drew ever closer, shaking the earth with each bombardment. Even within the thick concrete walls of the Führer bunker, buried some 28 feet below ground, the noise was impossible to ignore. It was as though the sound of cannons were not simply weapons of war, but the tolling of a funeral bell announcing the last moments of a regime built on blood and delusion. Inside the bunker, silence hung heavier than the dust in the air. It was a silence not of peace, but of dread, a suffocating stillness that spoke of unspoken truths. Every man and woman inside knew the Reich was finished, yet no one dared say it aloud. The atmosphere was thick with fear, resignation, and the slow collapse of human will. Hitler himself sat pale and broken, his once fiery eyes now bloodshot from sleepless nights of paranoia and despair. His hands trembled uncontrollably, the vigor and commanding presence he had once projected now completely gone. The man who had demanded obedience with fiery speeches and iron discipline now shuffled weakly through narrow corridors, muttering in a voice drained of conviction. His face was waxy and lined with deep wrinkles, a shadow of the figure who once mesmerized crowds of thousands. At around 3:30 in the afternoon, a single gunshot echoed through the bunker, followed by a moment of terrible silence. The man whose hands had been stained with the blood of millions was dead by his own doing. Beside him, Eva Braun, the woman he had married just 36 hours earlier, chose poison over survival. Together, they exited history not with the grandeur of empire, but with the cowardice of self-destruction. The dictator who had once dreamed of a 1,000-year Reich was gone, his reign of terror collapsing into ashes in just 12 years. But how had such a man risen to power in the first place? How did an obscure, embittered Austrian youth transform into one of history's most destructive figures? To understand Hitler's final moments, one must first journey back to his earliest beginnings. Childhood in Austria. Adolf Hitler was born on April 20th, 1889, in the small Austrian town of Braunau am Inn, on the border with Germany. His father, Alois Hitler, was a strict and often violent customs officer, quick-tempered and merciless in his discipline. Alois demanded obedience and success from his children, and young Adolf often bore the brunt of his father's anger. Beatings were frequent, leaving the boy both resentful and rebellious. In contrast, his mother, Clara Hitler, was gentle and deeply devoted to her son. She provided the warmth and affection that Adolf so desperately craved, balancing out the harshness of Alois. Adolf's bond with Clara was profound, perhaps the only true emotional attachment he ever had in his life. She nurtured his interest in drawing and painting, supporting his dream of becoming an artist. But fate dealt a cruel blow when, at just 17, Adolf's beloved mother died of cancer. The loss devastated him. It was a wound that never truly healed, and it left him unmoored at a crucial stage in his youth. Without guidance, he wandered between dreams of artistic greatness and the harsh reality of rejection. Struggles in Vienna. After his mother's death, Hitler moved to Vienna, convinced that he was destined to become a great painter. Twice he applied to the prestigious Academy of Fine Arts, and twice he was rejected. His lack of formal training and mediocre skill doomed his aspirations. These failures crushed his ambitions and deepened his sense of personal injustice. In Vienna, Hitler lived a precarious life, selling sketches to tourists, staying in homeless shelters, and barely surviving on meager means. Yet during this period, something far more dangerous than poverty took root in his mind. Vienna at the time was a city steeped in anti-Semitic propaganda and political extremism. Pamphlets and newspapers openly spread hatred, blaming Jews for economic problems, social decline, and cultural change. Hitler absorbed these ideas hungrily, shaping his worldview around resentment and bigotry. At the same time, he became captivated by pan-German nationalism, the belief that all German-speaking peoples should be united under one nation. Though Austrian by birth, Hitler's heart and identity tied themselves to Germany. He began to see himself as part of a greater destiny, one that transcended his humble and bitter existence in Vienna. Soldier in the Great War. When the First World War erupted in 1914, Hitler seized the opportunity to serve the country he idolized. He volunteered for the German army, despite not being a German citizen. For nearly 4 years, he fought on the front lines as a messenger. His service was marked by bravery. He was decorated with the Iron Cross, but he never rose beyond the rank of corporal. For Hitler, the war was transformative. He found purpose, belonging, and camaraderie in the trenches. But when Germany surrendered in 1918, he felt as though the ground had been pulled from beneath him. The humiliation of defeat and the harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles filled him with rage. He became obsessed with the idea that Germany had been stabbed in the back by internal enemies, namely Jews and communists. This poisonous belief would become the foundation of his political ideology. Seeds of a demagogue. In the chaotic years after the war, Germany was racked by political upheaval, economic collapse, and widespread despair. Inflation destroyed savings, unemployment soared, and people searched desperately for someone to blame. Amid this turmoil, Hitler discovered his true talent, not as an artist or soldier, but as a speaker. He joined the German Workers' Party, a small, radical group that would soon evolve into the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party. His speeches were fiery and captivating, filled with passion, anger, and promises of national revival. Crowds were drawn to him, mesmerized by his ability to articulate their frustrations and give voice to their fears. By channeling resentment into rhetoric, Hitler began to rise. He transformed himself from a failed artist and embittered veteran into a political agitator who could move masses with his words. His blend of nationalism, anti-Semitism, and promises of restored pride resonated with a population desperate for hope, a foreshadowing of power. By the early 1920s, Hitler's influence within the party had grown tremendously. His charisma, combined with his ruthless determination, propelled the Nazi Party from obscurity into the national spotlight. In 1923, he attempted to seize power in Munich through the beer hall putsch. The coup failed, and Hitler was arrested. Yet even in prison, he turned defeat into opportunity. During his confinement, he began writing Mein Kampf, a book that laid out his ideology, his hatred of Jews, and his vision for Germany's future. Though few could have predicted it at the time, these words would later become a blueprint for one of history's darkest chapters. Thus, the man who would one day plunge the world into war and genocide was shaped not overnight, but through years of rejection, resentment, and radicalization. From the quiet streets of Braunau to the broken ruins of Berlin, his journey traced a line of destruction that began with personal wounds and ended with global catastrophe. Adolf Hitler's childhood in Braunau am Inn was marked by strict discipline from his father, Alois, a customs official with little patience for his son's artistic ambitions. His mother, Clara, offered warmth and protection, but her death from cancer in 1907 dealt a devastating blow to the adolescent Hitler. Orphaned at 18, he carried a bitterness that would accompany him for life. Dreams and defeats in Vienna. With a modest inheritance, Hitler left for Vienna in hopes of becoming an artist. Twice he applied to the Academy of Fine Arts, and twice he was rejected. The rejection letters cut deeply. Unfit for painting. The Academy suggested he might study architecture, but without secondary education credentials, even that path was closed. Proud and resentful, Hitler drifted. He lived in men's hostels, sold sketches of Vienna's buildings, and wandered the city's grand boulevards, observing society. Vienna at the time was a melting pot of cultures. Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Jews, Slavs, all jostling within the Austro-Hungarian Empire. To Hitler, who believed in a racially pure German identity, this diversity looked like chaos. His experiences here, mixed with exposure to anti-Semitic newspapers and populist rhetoric, hardened prejudices that would later become central to his ideology. Poverty deepened his isolation. By 1909, he was destitute, spending nights in shelters, selling postcards to survive. Friends later recalled him as a man already convinced he was destined for greatness, but with no clear path forward. These years in Vienna planted both resentment toward authority and obsession with the German nation's destiny. Munich and the outbreak of war. In 1913, seeking escape from military service in Austria, Hitler moved to Munich, Germany. There, he felt more at home, among true Germans as he saw them. When World War I erupted in 1914, Hitler, then 25, eagerly volunteered for the German army. At last, he had found belonging, comradeship, and purpose. Serving as a messenger on the Western Front, he endured some of the war's bloodiest battles: the Somme, Ypres, Passchendaele. Despite the horrors, mud-filled trenches, constant shelling, clouds of poison gas, Hitler thrived in the structure of military life. Twice decorated for bravery, including the Iron Cross First Class, he embraced the war as the defining experience of his youth. But in 1918, the tide turned. Germany, exhausted by blockade and battlefield losses, faced collapse. In October, Hitler was temporarily blinded by a British mustard gas attack. While recovering in hospital, he heard the shocking news. Germany had surrendered. The Kaiser abdicated. The empire was gone. For Hitler, the moment was unbearable. He later described it as the greatest shock of his life. The dream of national glory shattered, replaced by humiliation. Many soldiers, like Hitler, believed they had been stabbed in the back by politicians, Marxists, and Jews on the home front who supposedly betrayed the army. This stab-in-the-back myth became central to his worldview. Aftermath of defeat. Germany in 1919 was chaotic. Revolution swept through the country. The new Weimar Republic signed the Treaty of Versailles, which imposed crushing reparations, stripped Germany of territories, and limited its army. National pride lay in ruins. Hitler, still in the army, found himself stationed in Munich during the turbulence. Soldiers' councils clashed with government troops. Communists briefly seized power. Amid the turmoil, Hitler discovered his gift for oratory. In one assignment, he was asked to monitor small political groups. Attending their meetings, he realized his fiery speeches could electrify audiences. In September 1919, Hitler attended a gathering of the German Workers' Party, DAP, a tiny nationalist group with barely a few dozen members. He stood up to speak, unleashing his anger at Germany's humiliation. The room responded with applause. Anton Drexler, the party's founder, saw potential and invited him to join. Seeds of a political path. By late 1919, Hitler was no longer just a bitter veteran. He had found his stage. His years of poverty in Vienna His experiences in the trenches and his rage at defeat had fused into a sense of mission. Germany, he believed, needed a savior who would restore its strength and purity. He convinced himself he was that man. The Bohemian dropout had begun his transformation into a political agitator. When Adolf Hitler joined the German Workers' Party in 1919, no one could have predicted that this obscure group of malcontents would one day rule Germany. The party had fewer than 60 members and met in beer halls to rail against Marxists, Jews, and the Treaty of Versailles. But Hitler quickly proved to be its most powerful asset. His speeches electrified listeners with fiery rhetoric, mixing rage with conviction. He transformed the small gathering into a movement, building the Nazi identity. By 1920, the party changed its name to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, NSDAP, soon nicknamed the Nazi Party. Hitler helped design its emblem, a black swastika in a white circle on a red banner. The striking symbol, combined with his spellbinding speeches, gave the party a new identity. Crowds swelled at his rallies. He denounced the November criminals who had signed the Versailles Treaty, condemned Marxists for spreading revolution, and blamed Jews for weakening the German race. His words found eager audiences among veterans, the unemployed, and the disillusioned middle class. The beer hall peach in 1923. With Germany spiraling into crisis, Hitler decided the time was ripe for revolution. Hyperinflation had destroyed the currency. Workers carried wages home in wheelbarrows of worthless notes. French troops occupied the Ruhr industrial region. Hunger and despair spread through the cities. Inspired by Mussolini's march on Rome, Hitler plotted to seize power in Bavaria and then march on Berlin. On the night of November 8, 1923, he and armed supporters stormed a Munich beer hall, declaring a national revolution. For a moment, it seemed success was possible. But the next day, when they marched through Munich, police opened fire. 16 Nazis were killed, and Hitler was arrested. Prison and Mein Kampf. Hitler's trial became a platform. Rather than express remorse, he proclaimed his loyalty to Germany and denounced the Weimar Republic. The judges, sympathetic to nationalist causes, gave him a lenient sentence. 5 years, with the possibility of parole. He served only 9 months in Landsberg prison. During his confinement, Hitler dictated Mein Kampf, My Struggle, to Rudolf Hess. Part autobiography, part political manifesto, it laid out his vision. Germany's destiny was to expand eastward for living space, Lebensraum. Marxism must be crushed, and Jews must be excluded from society. Few took the book seriously at the time, but it would later become the ideological blueprint for the Nazi state. Rebuilding the party. After his release in 1924, Hitler restructured the Nazi Party. He realized that seizing power by force had failed. Instead, he would pursue a legal path, gaining influence through elections, propaganda, and organization. The party created paramilitary wings like the SA, stormtroopers, to protect rallies and intimidate opponents, and later, the SS, Schutzstaffel, a smaller elite guard loyal only to Hitler. By the mid-1920s, the party remained marginal. But the Wall Street crash of 1929 changed everything. The Great Depression hit Germany hard. Unemployment soared to 6 million. Families lost savings, businesses collapsed, and faith in the Weimar Republic evaporated. In this climate of despair, Hitler's promises of national revival, jobs, and restored pride resonated. A rising force in politics. Between 1930 and 1932, Nazi support surged. Their propaganda was modern, using posters, mass rallies, and radio broadcasts to reach millions. Hitler flew across the country in campaign tours, addressing crowds as if he were Germany's savior. The Nazis presented themselves as a movement of unity, beyond class divisions, while secretly targeting minorities. They blamed Jews for Germany's economic woes, portrayed communists as agents of Moscow, and painted the Weimar Republic as corrupt and weak. In the July 1932 elections, the Nazis won 37% of the vote, becoming the largest party in the Reichstag. Hitler demanded the chancellorship, but President Paul von Hindenburg, a decorated World War I general, distrusted him and initially refused. Backroom politics. For months, Germany drifted in political deadlock. Chancellors came and went, unable to secure stable majorities. Conservative elites, terrified of communism and believing they could control Hitler, began to consider him as a tool. They thought he would be their puppet, someone who could rally mass support while they guided policy behind the scenes. After intense negotiations, the deal was struck. On January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. Nationalists and conservatives cheered, convinced they had outmaneuvered him. Few realized they had just opened the door to dictatorship, a foreshadowing of catastrophe. The man who had once lived in Vienna's hostels, who had wandered Munich as a failed artist, who had screamed speeches in smoky beer halls, was now head of the German government. Within months, he would consolidate absolute power, dismantle democracy, and set Germany on a path to war and genocide. The rise of Hitler was not inevitable, but it was made possible by fear, crisis, and the willingness of many to believe in a man who promised greatness at any cost.